We keep saying it. Theatre changes lives, and it's a beautiful sentence. It is also a dangerous one because it sounds like a result when it is often a hope, a story, or a funding language habit. This film is not here to sneer at applied theatre, social theatre, theatre of the oppressed, or any of the work done in classrooms, youth clubs, prisons, refuges, hospitals, streets, and community halls. It is here to challenge the inflation, the way we slide from something meaningful happened in the room to a life changed, without stopping to define what we mean, how we know, what we don't know, and what we might be quietly pretending not to see. If you make theatre with a change agenda, you will recognise the moment I'm about to describe. The circle closes at the end. Someone shares a difficult truth. Someone else offers a brave alternative in a scene. The room applauds. The facilitator thanks everyone. A few people cry. There is a feeling of release, relief, pride, connection. And then everybody goes back to their lives. Monday morning arrives and it doesn't care about your applause. The corridor still exists. The exclusion policy still exists. The housing issue still exists. The phone still buzzes. The social worker is still overloaded. The waiting list is still long. The staff turnover is still real. The money is still tight. The power is still where it was. So, here is the question that should sit at the centre of any theatre for change practice. When we say positive change happened, what exactly are we claiming? A change in feeling, a change in skills, a change in relationships, a change in behaviour, a change in outcomes, a change in power? Those are not the same thing. A powerful workshop can be real without being proof of life improvement. A moving story can be true without being evidence of reduced harm. A moment of courage can be meaningful without being durable. If we do not separate these, we end up making claims that are not just unprovable, but structurally naive. Because theatre rarely controls the conditions that decide whether change sticks. Now, why do grand claims happen so often in this field? One reason is simple. The story of transformation is emotionally satisfying. It makes the work feel worth it. It makes the labour bearable. It makes the practitioner feel like a good person in a world that often rewards the opposite. Another reason is institutional. Funders love transformation language. Schools love quick wins. Organisations love tidy outcomes. And we are trained to speak in before and after. And Michael Balfour names this pressure with surgical clarity. The commissioning of transformation by these donors infects the ways in which applied theatre defines and talks about itself. Infects is the right word here. Not because donors are villains and artists are saints, but because the language of transformation spreads through the system, and soon everyone is speaking it, even when the evidence is thin. What happens next is predictable. We start treating the workshop as if it's the intervention rather than one moment inside an ecosystem. We start confusing performance with proof. We start practicing change because it fits the arc of the session. We start writing evaluation like a highlight reel. and we start placing young people into a familiar role, not as authorities on their own lives, but as evidence. This film refuses that. Young people are not your case studies. They are not your marketing material. They are not your proof of impact props. They are expert in what happens after the session. And if you actually foreground young people, the story becomes less comfortable because many young people will tell you some version of this. That workshop was meaningful, but it did not change my life. Or this, I felt powerful in the drama. I felt powerless again the next day. Or this, I said what you wanted because that's what adults reward. This is not an accusation aimed at every practitioner. It's an invitation to recognize a dynamic. In a room run by adults, evaluated by adults, funded by adults, reported by adults, it is not neutral to ask participants at the end whether they have changed. It is not neutral to hand out a feedback form while the facilitator is still smiling nearby. It is not neutral to frame the closing question so that the right answer is gratitude. In research, this is not mysterious. It's a known effect. People respond to the demand of the setting. People want to please. People want to belong. People do not want to be the awkward one who says, actually, nothing is different. So, when a practitioner confidently claims, lives changed, I want to ask a basic follow-up. How do you know? Not how do you feel? Not what did the room sound like? Not how strong was the ending? How do you know? Let's name some of the most common claims that get made and why they are so often weaker than they sound. Claim: confidence increased. Based on what measure? Over what period? Compared to what baseline? Are we measuring confidence, or are we measuring who felt safe enough to speak in that one room? Claim: behavior improved. Whose definition of improved? Is improved code for more compliant? Are we measuring genuine self-regulation, or are we rewarding a young person for performing calmly in front of authority? Claim: attitudes changed. Which attitudes? How was it measured? Sustained for how long? And even if attitudes shifted, did actions shift, and did conditions allow those actions to matter? Claim: the project reduced bullying, violence, exclusions, offending, self-harm, dropout, and so on. This is the biggest one, and it is one that should make you stop speaking for a moment. Because those outcomes have multiple drivers: poverty, trauma, institutional policy, family stress, mental health, peer culture, online dynamics, community safety, staffing ratios, access to support, and the daily reality of power. A theatre project may contribute, it may support, it may catalyse, it may open a door, but claiming direct causation without robust evidence is not just shaky, it is reputationally reckless. Judith Ackroyd put it bluntly years ago, and the sentence still holds. There is a crying need for evaluation of applied theatre. And she adds something that should humble the field. We need to know the distinctive contribution drama can make, and we need to be alert to unintended consequences. Unintended consequences. Like what? Like raising hopes without pathways, like surfacing trauma without aftercare, like placing vulnerable disclosures into unsafe institutional spaces, like turning lived pain into a product, like blaming the participant for not changing when the environment stays violent, hostile, or indifferent, like using empowerment language to avoid confronting adult responsibility. If you want a wider lens than theatre, the research on arts programs in development and social change raises similar warnings. A systematic review by Ware and Dunphy reports that only about 1/3 of studies in this area used robust methods and highlights overly strong claims made with insufficient support. So, the question is not whether theatre can matter. The question is whether we have the discipline to speak truthfully about how it matters. Now, I want to bring in children's rights because it sharpens the argument in exactly the way this field often avoids. Mary John's work on children's rights insists we talk about power, not just participation. In a review of her book, the familiar 3 Ps of children's rights are named, and then missing one is added, the big P, power. This matters because a lot of Theatre for Change rhetoric celebrates voice. Voice is not power. Expression is not power. Confidence is not power. Power is the ability to shape decisions, access resources, set terms, change conditions, and be protected when you speak. Power is what happens after the room. Mary John also delivers a line that should haunt every adult-led youth project. Adolescence, an artificially created cold waiting room to life, appears now to endure more waiting. A waiting room to life. That is what many young people experience in systems run by adults. You can speak, but you cannot decide. You can share, but you cannot change the rule. You can perform agency, but you cannot hold authority. So, here's the provocation. If your theatre project celebrates young people taking control inside a fictional scenario, but gives them no increased control in real life, be careful what you claim. If the project gives voice without shifting power, then say that. Say what it did, not what you wish it did. Now, let me make the argument stronger, because if you want a film that invites debate, you need to steelman the opposition. People will say, change is complex. You cannot measure everything. True. People will say, not all change is visible. Not all value is countable. True. People will say, theatre works on meaning, identity, belonging, imagination, and those shape lives indirectly. Also true. But none of that justifies pretending. None of that gives you permission to turn possibility into proof. It simply means that you must choose your claims carefully, and you must match your methods to your claims. And this is where Michael Balfour offers a way through that makes that feel like both a critique and a rescue. He proposes a theatre of little changes that eschews big claims of social efficacy. Little changes, not as a downgrade, as honesty. Because little changes can be real, valuable, and ethically stated. A young person experiences being listened to without interruption for once. A group finds language for a feeling that was previously only rage. A participant rehearses saying no. A classroom rehearses how to repair after harm. A staff team sees a pupil differently for the first time. A community recognizes a shared story. Those are not nothing, but they are not automatically lives changed. So, what would it look like to talk about real change without falling into false claims? First, define change in concrete terms. Not empowerment. What behaviour? What action? What access? What safety? What decision? What resource? What relationship? What outcome? What power shift? Second, measure it over time. Not at the end of the session, weeks later, months later. Third, include the people who did not like it. Yeah? Include the people who did not like it. The dropouts, the quiet ones, the ones who say, that was nice, but it didn't touch my real life. If your evaluation only captures the most engaged participants in the emotional afterglow, you are measuring a good day, not impact. Fourth, stop evaluating only the young people. If the environment is part of the problem, then adult behaviour and institutional policy must be part of the measurement. If the system stays the same and the young person is asked to change, that is not social justice. That is adaptation training. Fifth, treat theatre as a contributor inside an ecosystem, not as a lone saviour. If you claim reduced exclusions, show the chain. What else changed at the same time? Policy shifts, staffing changes, pastoral support, family intervention, timetable reforms, new reporting mechanisms. Be brave enough to say, we contributed. We did not single-handedly cause. Sixth, build youth-led evaluation, not adult approval. If we are serious about power, young people must help define what better means, what counts as evidence, and what questions should be asked, not token consultation. Co-authorship, because if your project is supposedly about young people's lives, but the definition of success is written by adults, You are reproducing the power imbalance you claim to challenge. Now, here are some examples of what real change might look like, the kind you can actually point to. A school changes policy because young people helped write it, and there is accountability when it is breached. A youth council has a budget and decision rights, not just a badge and a photo. A safeguarding pathway gets faster, clearer, and trusted, and reporting increases because young people believe that they will be taken seriously. A reduction in exclusions happen over a year, and the data is transparent, and it is paired with qualitative accounts and do not read like marketing. Adults change practice. Restorative processes are resourced, not announced. Support continues after the workshop, and the young person can name specific resources they accessed that they did not before. Notice how structural this is. Notice how unromantic it is. Notice how it pulls authority away from the facilitator and puts it onto systems, resources, policy, and shared power. This is why inflated claims are so tempting, because real change is slow, contested, political, expensive, and rarely cinematic. But if you want to protect the credibility of the field, you have to stop selling miracles. You have to stop using the aesthetics of transformation as proof of transformation. And you have to stop letting adults be the final authority on what worked. So here is the line I want this film to draw. If you are going to claim transformation, you need transformation level evidence, time, follow-up, triangulation, transparency about limitations, and humility about causation. If you cannot do that, do not pretend. Say what you actually know. Say, we created a space for expression. Say, we rehearsed alternatives. Say, we momentarily saw shifts. Say, we suspect contribution. Say, we cannot claim causation. That is not weakness. That is professional integrity. And it does something else. It stops turning young people into proof. It makes room for young people to say the harder truth without being punished for it. That was meaningful, but it didn't fix my life. That helped, but the system has stayed violent. That I felt seen, and I still felt powerless after. That you gave me a voice, but you kept the power. Now, I want to end by inviting criticism, because this film should not be a sermon. It should be a challenge. Practitioners, if you disagree, show your evidence and show your humility. Funders, if you demand transformation language, fund the evaluation that would make those claims credible. Schools and institutions, if you celebrate student voice, shared decision making, power, and resources, stop pretending you have done the brave thing. And to anyone working with young people, especially in education, ask yourself one question before you make the claim impact. What changed when the room was packed away? If the answer is unclear, do not lie. Make smaller claims. Make better partnerships. Push for structural shifts. Build youth power, not just youth performance. A theatre of little changes can still be radical, but only if we stop pretending little changes are a finished revolution. Thank you.